sounds corny, but that's one of the reasons why our country was founded, because we wanted everyone to be able to have a say in important decisions that would affect them. And when you vote, you're selecting people who you feel are going to represent you and what you believe. So it's a powerful thing, being able to vote and actually vote.
Most definitely. You're speaking of voting, and let's not even start with national. We'll start at the local. It's very important, and I think any changes that are done nationally are done at the local level of many small villages and towns and cities. That's the way that goes, and that should be targeted first. Voting is very important. Overall. Especially here in Ossining. And I don't want to get off on that topic. It has to be.
I think that it's important for people to vote in, local elections and in national elections.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's very disheartening. The national figures that we see, somewhere around 40%, I guess, less than 50% sometimes, even in presidential elections. And what people don't realize, we have what's known as fall-off. People will vote for president, and there'll be a few less vote for senator, a few less for congressman, a few less for assemblyman. And by the time they get way down to the local level, there might be as much as a 8 to 10% fall-off. Part of that is maybe because people don't understand the local issues. But part of it is they just want to get in there, vote for president, and get out. So it even affects the localities even more than it does the country nationwide. I think it's very important that obviously we know all of the tried and true answers that you hear from this. Certainly going back to our Revolutionary War, going back to all of the people who have shed blood for us so that we might have this opportunity in just wars. I think that if you look at, there are some third world nations that have higher voter turnout than we do. And it's disheartening, and I obviously we have to do something about it.
Voting is a privilege that we are given in this country. It's a privilege that we fought for. It was a privilege that we earned. So yes, we do have to exercise the right to vote. It's very important that we do so that when there are people that we do not like in government or that are not doing what we ask of them to do, we as a people collectively come together and vote them out. That's the privilege that we are given. We are given the privilege to get rid of those that do not work for us.
I know that it's very difficult for people to vote at times. They're so busy and they have many other things to do. Additionally, I know that there's a lot of cynicism about our democracy and our political process. Nevertheless, I think that if people vote, then they certainly are entitled to complain about it. So, and to express their disagreement with the process. But if they don't vote, it's my feeling that they then have lost their opportunity to make their ideas work.
Also, they're going to influence politics. It's the only way. If you don't vote, you don't have a right to complain. This is one of the favorite occupations of people, to complain about things that they didn't even put their input into.
First off, it's important that individuals express their opinion at all elections. School, local, federal, state, and all levels. Change only happens when there is an expression of an idea or support for an idea. Most politicians do not want to upset the apple cart. They'll do anything to make you feel secure that they're doing something, but they don't want to upset the apple cart because there's always someone who is opposed to every issue. Every issue has a side, and one side is right and the other side is right. It's something in the middle that needs to work so then progress in the community can grow. Only by going to your elections and expressing how you feel and telling the elected people how you feel about them and what you feel they ought to support. Are you going to accomplish your goal and express your personal opinion? So yes, voting is a very important mechanism for the expression of your opinion and getting politicians to work to continue to enhance our country, our village, and our state, but at the same time, for them to be cognizant of the ideas the individual has.
I think it's very important to vote because I just think it's one of the very important personal responsibilities that we have as citizens. Last year I read a biography of Barbara Jordan, which gave me a lot of background about, the Voting Rights Act and how someone who was totally, dedicated to the idea of everyone having the right to vote. And it had a very profound impact on me.
Important, and it took me a while to realize how important it is. It's a way of feeling empowered, as well as being almost like a civic duty and a responsibility as an adult individual. As a citizen, you have that right, and I'm not even sure if it's just a right or a privilege anymore. It's almost like a requirement, or should be viewed as a requirement for people to really take part and let their voice be heard. The election process is more important than a lot of people realize. Even more important than I can explain it to you right now, even where I'm at now. I think that from my perspective, in the African American community, there needs to be more people involved in voting and getting involved in the election process, because it's a way of empowerment. If you don't get out and use the vote, then you can be very easily overlooked. It's kind of like the census. If you don't take part in the census or didn't take part in the census, then a segment of the community is not going to get something that they may need or can help them in their situation. So if you don't go out and vote, if you don't take the time to be involved in politics and talk to the public officials or the elected officials, then you can very easily be overlooked. I think voting is a way of getting someone's attention. If you have a large turnout, especially in the African American community, again, when you raise a concern, then people will listen. People will have to listen, because if they want to stay in office, then they have to go through the community, in each part of the community. You're going to have to address the African American community, the Hispanic community, the European community, and everybody that takes part. I think those communities that are somewhat empowered understand the importance of voting, and that's why they do it, and that's why politicians, quote unquote, court their vote and go after them and seek, well, what do you need? What can I do for you? What will make you vote for me? We don't have that in the African American community. We do have it, maybe it's just in a small way, but I think it can be greater if more people voted. And I think it's very important to be registered and to vote.
To vote, I think, only if they think of their vote as being an expression of who they are with other people. So that it's obvious that most elections aren't decided by one vote, but they are decided by groups of voters. And if people think of themselves as being part of a certain kind of group, whether it be a social class or a race or an interest group or part of a social movement, then the votes tend to be more meaningful as an expression of who they are and what they think the nation should be pursuing. So I guess my sense is that if we think of ourselves as just as individuals, as opposed to being members of other things like villages, towns, races, join together with workers or other people that we work with, if we tend to think of ourselves that way, then voting can be very important as a kind of identity.
I think that it is important to vote. I vote myself because that is the only time that we can show our unity as cultures and nations. We are many nations in this country from all over Latin America and the Caribbean. So I think it's important for all of us to vote. That unites us all.
I'm a big fan of voting, as you'll see from my shirt here. Last year, in fact, we had people go outside of the, color outside of the lines on voting, and right-in park had about 170 people out of a village of 25,000 brought a mighty development to a screeching halt. There's a lot of power in the vote. It is very difficult to see it up close when you're making a decision about whether or not you should vote. You look at some of the history, you'll see that people have died trying to vote. People have fought wars over the right to vote. In the United States, the evolution of the right to vote shows how powerful it is. It was at first only allowed to propertied white males. Then, as the scope of people who were allowed to participate grew, forces of reaction retrenched and started imposing things like poll taxes, literacy requirements, things that were designed to reduce participation. In other words, to empower those that have vote against the interests of those who can't vote, reduce the set of people that are allowed to vote, and concentrate power in their hands. There are many devices under current election law, as a matter of fact, that prove that this is still the case. You have to register so many days before an election. There's a form that you have to use that's not, mailed to your house every 2 weeks. If you're going to run for political office, you have to have a political apparatus to gather signatures, of hundreds of people of one party. The person gathering the signatures has to belong to that party. There's all kinds of technical requirements that make it difficult. Why? Because there's power in voting.
Question, this is on the record.
Yes.
I feel that it's very important for particularly black people to vote in this country. And, in the early 50s and 60s, a lot of people died for their right to vote. I believe that not only black people, but minorities or those people, poor people and women, who see that today, we have to move from where we couldn't vote to so-called democracy. And once we began to vote, you saw that laws started changing. And then the Constitution started changing. So what you see now is like corporate America really taking over, no matter how strong we say our vote is. So what that does, that raises the level of people's consciousness, because we live in this capitalistic state where corporate America is ruling everything. Now we have to go by the Constitution that says when the government no longer serves the needs of the people have a right to turn over that government. So I think the vote is important because it takes us to a level of understanding. And no matter if we vote, corporate America is still going to buy the candidates. You see it in the presidential election with Bush, Gore. They don't represent anybody. Corporations use the death penalty as a way to terrorize poor people and keep them in their place. So the people have to rise up. But the only way they'll rise up is to use their vote, knowing that it doesn't work, and then move to another level.
It's very important that people register and vote because it's important to get the government and the local officials on issues to get passed, and also it's basically their right as American citizens to vote.
It's important to vote anytime you get an opportunity to vote because that's the only way you can participate directly in democracy by voting.
They have to make up their own mind, let them know that they is somebody too, and their opinion can be counted if they vote.
What do you think would make people believe that their opinion would be counted?
I really don't know. I mean, they just got to believe in themselves. I can't tell why. Other people won't, so they don't want to vote. All I know that is it is important to vote, and that your opinion do count. Instead of standing on the corner arguing about it, you put it on the paper, vote, and your opinion counts too.
People feel powerless and unconnected. There's so much going on in our lives every day. you think, well, someone else is going to take care of it. And I think that when you have a lot of people thinking, well, someone else is going to take care of it, I think that's where the danger is, because representatives who we do elect are only going to be as good as we let them. We need to still be aware of what's going on, and so that there's some real danger when people think, well, someone else is going to take care of it, because first of all, someone might not take care of some issue that's important to you or important to lots of people, and it's just not a good thing to let people do things without you not checking in to see how things are going on.
The issue of voting is how, yeah, I want to go vote. Election is Tuesday. Yeah, I got to make some time to go there, but I'm just so busy, and really, my vote doesn't count. The issue is your vote does count. Even the issue of you donation to somebody is a very critical and important issue. And you need to make sure that you express that issue on a consistent basis. People look at it and they say, I'm too busy, my vote doesn't count, I don't like either person. These are reasons why I shouldn't go vote. You don't have to vote for every line or every position, but you should go and vote for those where you have an opinion and you have a feeling and you want to make it known.
Percentage of people are registered to vote that are eligible to be registered to vote?
About 75% of people are registered,
And out of that, who usually votes?
in congressional elections, about only a third of the eligible, out of the registered voters, in congressional elections, about half. Out of all the people that would be eligible to vote who are not registered, only a third come out for congressional elections now. So elections are decided, generally speaking, by, at least in Congress, and in the presidential level, we have the lowest turnout we've had since the 1920s, less than 50% of eligible voters as well. That people have wondered what it is that is keeping vote totals so low.
That's my next question. What
Yeah.
do you think?
Well, there's lots of reasons that have been given. Some people say it's apathy. I don't happen to agree with that. I think what it is that people feel, non-voters and voters both actually, tend to think that voting is an important act in the abstract. But the difference between non-voters and voters is that most non-voters don't believe that they can make a difference by voting. They don't think that that politics can really be changed. And it seems to me that that's interesting because amongst most non-voters, they tend to be in lower income groups and younger, and also have less formal education than vote. Those are the groups in American society which probably most need to vote and most need to believe that they can change politics, because right now politics is kind of, in my mind, skewed towards the upper classes and upper income people. So it's kind of this vicious circle from my perspective, because politics right now appears to be just monopolized by wealthy people and wealthy donors and contributors. People who don't participate in politics sort of say, well, see, you can't really change it. But because they think that they can't really change it, it continues on as it is. So somebody sometime has to break the cycle of powerlessness there.
They are more or less have thrown their hands up. But there are other people, and our younger people who are able to vote do not take serious issue with those things going on around and about them. That goes for education, that goes for the politics in this immediate area. They have no idea as to how it affects them. They think it doesn't, and we have many politicians who make them feel that it does, and some of them who really make them feel that it does not, just by avoidance. Politics weighs very heavily in the churches. I see churches doing very little. At one time, black churches were really in the fray of things. Grassroots, I mean, getting down with what had to be done. We have a NAACP who does not have that much empowerment to do what we have to do when we see the wrongs being done here in Austin. Voting is very important, but it is not important if there's no empowerment, if there's no interest, and if your own people are more or less just selling you out.
People are turned off by politics or politicians. I think that's a lame excuse, and I don't think that it's true. I think people are just lazy. I think people that our society, we certainly have the means to inform people of what's going on. I do think that when it comes especially to the national campaigns, that we need to raise the level of that, and even at the local level, raise the level of information that goes on. And the press covers less, they spend less money on it than they ever have before, both at the national level and at our local level here with Gannett. They have fewer reporters, people that don't really, they're constantly changing, they don't get into a groove where they know what's going on in the community for too long. They just get into a groove and they're gone. I think that indifference is a sickness that could ruin our democracy.
That biography about Barbara Jordan, I think that for a lot of people, the historical context as to how the voting rights came about and just the struggle to reach that point is missing. But I believe there's also a sense from a lot of people that it doesn't matter.
I'm not sure about the answer of that question, but I think that maybe it's the jobs, they have to work hard to pay high rents and support the families. And we have a lot of single parent families also in Ossining. And adding to that, I think is that they don't see that much hope into the vote, so they don't think that it will make any difference.
One of the things is that people say, well, what difference can my vote possibly make? But there have been numerous examples of elections that have been won by one vote or a few votes. So certainly, even though that's not the case in every single instance, in every single election, I think people, in the back of their minds, people have this feeling that, oh, I can't make a difference. And I think that's absolutely wrong. They can make a difference.
Example, approximately 15,000 registered voters. Last village election, there were about 3,000 people that voted. Out of the people that live in Ossining, of course, there's a big chunk of people that aren't registered to vote even, or whose registration has expired because they haven't voted within a prescribed period of time. One of the reasons that people don't vote, in my opinion, and from reviewing some of the data, people have been polled endlessly on this. They'll vote in that fashion. It's interesting. Is that they feel like they're powerless. We feel like we're powerless. This candidate selection process is clearly a joke. There is no difference in practical terms between Democrats and Republicans in terms of policy. It's a matter of what kind of public relations. It's like looking at the dishwasher detergent at the supermarket. You have Cascade and you have the brand, the store brand or some other brand, and you open it up and you see it's exactly the same stuff, that it was made in the same factory, and so when people call themselves Democrats and then they sell your riverfront down the river, so to speak, to a Republican developer, or if they call themselves Republicans and they do it, people realize that they're being sold out. A lot of people are alienated over that fact and figure, what the hell should I bother for? It's like I'm endorsing it. One of the Green Party's most recent attempts at reform of the electoral system, for example, is to add none of the above to the ballot line. Unfortunately, courts in New York don't think that's a valid choice. But what we suspect would happen is this. If Democrat candidate and Republican candidate, and whoever else is on the line, hopefully there'd be others, Greens and working families and liberals and conservatives and everyone else, and more the merrier. But if none of the candidates appeal to people, rather than staying home and letting the newspapers and all of the wonks say that means that they endorse the process, they could go vote and write in, or just pull a lever for none of the above. It's as easy as voting for the others, in other words. You would find, I strongly suspect, that most people are not happy And if you had an added requirement that you needed to have more votes than none of the above to be elected to office, you would then force the parties to come back and bring candidates forward that were more popular than none of the above. And I think that democracy would be enhanced. That mechanism doesn't exist. That's one big reason why people that don't like any of the people running don't vote.
It's a combination of things. It's very complex. It could be people are just so busy that they just don't make the time to go out and vote. Could be that people are just not informed enough to make a decisive decision on who to vote for and who not to vote for. Maybe the information is not out there enough for them. Maybe people just don't care and just feel like, it doesn't matter who's on the school board or who's on the village board of trustees. It's not going to make a big difference. It's not going to make me or affect me one way or another. I don't know. It could be any number of reasons. Maybe we just haven't had anybody that's been really dynamic enough to just move the masses and make people come out and vote and say, you know what, I like this person. I want to vote for him or her and put them in office because I think they can make a difference.
I think there's a lot of cynicism. I think a lot of people read the newspaper and think, oh, this politician is crooked or that politician is not responsive to what the public wants, so why should I even bother? But this is really, I think it's just a lazy way of getting out of being responsible yourself for voting out somebody you think is crooked, or, and if you can't find a candidate that you like who's running, then run yourself. I think it's really important for people to take responsibility for the fact that this is our government. There really are not, what I really want to say is campaign finance reform, I think, is a really important thing that people need to insist be brought about, because I think that does a lot to inspire cynicism. People think, well, only the rich people can influence who gets elected. Only people with a lot of money can have access to politicians. And if you really think that's what's happening, then you need to insist that and accept no substitutes for good campaign finance reform. And I think that would help a lot. I think the media do a lot to discourage people when they do a lot of things with, I think sometimes it's intended to be humorous, but it causes an overall lack of respect for people who are holding public office. I think that the difficulty of the job of being an elected official is not always appreciated by people who, it's a lot easier to stand back and criticize and not actually have to stand up and do something and be responsible for it. So I would encourage people to run themselves and see what it takes.
They don't come out to vote is maybe there's not another choice for them to come out and vote for, or maybe the issues aren't important to them, or maybe they don't know enough about the issues to come out and vote to get them passed or to defeat the issues.
But it's because they feel that their vote doesn't count, that one candidate is so much more popular than the others, or something to that effect.
Apathy.
Apathy is certainly another reason.
Let them do it.
We have a lot of dissatisfaction. We have a two-party system that is actually a one-party system. Democrats and the Republicans are all the same. There's not a choice. So most people are just dissatisfied when they see the Democrats and the Republicans. They say, well, Democrats are Republicans, Republicans are Democrats, so we don't have anything to choose for. But there is a choice. There are other parties, and we should participate in the other parties and not just sit back and let those that do what they want to do over and over again abuse our rights, put us into situations where we have to pay higher taxes, where we are unemployed, and when we have all these other problems to deal with. We have these people that are sitting there because we don't exercise our privilege, our right to vote. So we should vote.
If you feel it's important for people to vote and yet they feel there's no choice, what do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the beautiful things about so-called democracy is that you can try to put in a independent political movement.
People don't, drive down somewhere to choose. There's no reason to. Again, in those cases, none of the above would have been excellent. It would have then encouraged people to say, hey, you know what? Most people do feel like I do, and you'd have more people running and a more diverse, set of opinions. When you're trying to solve problems, by the way, that's what you do. You try to ask everybody what the solution is if you don't have it. Why? Because one of the people you ask is going to have it, and you keep asking until you find those people. Well, if you're looking at voting as being the instrumentality that's used to govern ourselves, then you want to have as many voices involved, and you want to make it as easy for people as possible, because you will then have the largest set of collective wisdom at the disposal of the operation of our society.
Issues is even in a local political issue, reforms need to be made. One of the reforms being that we need to revamp what we are doing and how we are doing stuff in the political forum, so that then we have less control by the media and more control by the individual who goes out to vote. Today, media and how much money you have to spend to get media coverage is a controlling issue as to what the public knows about you and what they have as an opinion of you and your opponents. We need some reform in that area.
To get the messages out.
To get the messages out evenly, and to have the people realize that they have to research the individuals. They can't just wait for the media to make the presentation. Right now, a tremendous amount of voting is based on what the media has to say on the TV, which is paid political announcements. It's not what is real. It's not an equal issue. One of the things that has fallen by the wayside is the debate system that we all remember Lincoln and Lincoln's debates. We haven't had debates at local issues or at state levels, nor and very few of them at national levels, without it being a contrived political program where everybody knew the questions and knew how they were going to answer them before they got there. We need open forum debates for the people to listen and become aware. We've got media's coverage, such as here, the GOTV programs, where we could cover it and people even at home could get to see it and get an idea of what goes on. But these have fallen by the wayside. It's what is done in the political arena through advertisement that has become the #1 issue as to how somebody's political stance is taken. The important thing that the Ossining residents should be aware of is we need you to come out and vote, because Ossining is a growing metropolis that is coming of its own time. The developments are here, but these developments are going to happen with you or without you. So please come and express your opinion. Become informed. Visit the different activities in the community. Visit the different areas. Visit the different forums that we have. And if you need information, seek it from the League of Women Voters, from the Alliance for Downtown Ossining, from the Chamber of Commerce, or from any of the parties or individuals you have confidence in. Find out what's going on, so when you come and you vote, you are a educated, highly educated and informed voter.
Myself, I have been going around registering people and explaining to them that they should come out to vote because it's their right to get things passed or to stop things. I think the pride in this country has maybe decreased a little, and maybe we have to work at getting people to come out like on Memorial Day and take positive action to the communities because they're getting sick about what's going on.
So you're saying that people do not feel part of of what's happening? And
I think they get discouraged in what's going on in the local communities and maybe in the nationals, and they don't really want to come out. Unless it really affects them, then they'll come out and vote.
so sort of organizing people and letting them know how the issues affect them, and educating them. You think?
There's maybe more education on like the issues, more flyers going out, maybe more public hearings. But I think the Democrats, the Republicans, the Liberals, and all the other parties need to get together so that the people know who's in their district. Because going around, like I said, I was going around registering people. A lot of them don't even know their district leaders. So there's a lack of communication somewhere.
I think that there needs to be a more aggressive campaign toward education and people understanding and learning about voting and what it has meant. I also believe that people should be encouraged, regardless of what political party they belong to, that even if they write in a candidate, even that there has to be some way that people can voice their opinion, even if it doesn't support, whether it's a party or a particular candidate, such as a school board race. There has to be a way for people to also give a non-vote.
Homework assignment to think about who they should vote for. I know sometimes some elections there's so many candidates, so many things that seem minor, you feel like it's kind of overwhelming, and sometimes people don't vote for all the candidates if they don't know everything about them. The League of Women Voters puts out a pamphlet each election with a description of the qualifications of various candidates. And if you go through that, you can draw some opinions about who you think might be best qualified. The local newspapers almost always interview the various candidates for the village positions, not so much the judgeships, but the village and the town positions, as well as higher offices. And if you can't come to a debate, you can listen, you can read those interviews in the newspaper and see if that helps you make up your mind. I think it does require a little bit of homework. I know people are extremely busy. People are working very hard to stay in this community. And sometimes that's just something that goes by the wayside when you're too busy. So it's certainly great when there are televised rebroadcast debates. That helps people who can't come to one debate to see what's going on at their own convenience. And talking to friends who know what's going on is another way. It's certainly important to participate, because if you don't, then what happens is something you've neglected your responsibility.
To be educated, and sat down, almost like in a classroom type or in a formal group setting, and shown by diagrams and pictures and breaking it down to them how voting and politics affects everything in your life almost. You can't get away with it. Maybe a few things you can skirt your way around it, but it's very important that they take heed, and it's very important that it should be maybe done this way. That's my opinion, because they just don't get it. And there are a few of us in town who try to explain this to them, but then you have other people who really ignore them. They use them on a continuous basis.
For one thing, how people normally hear about voting is through either TV or the newspaper, and if you don't watch a lot of TV, and if perhaps you don't read, I mean, those are going to be some issues. So I guess we need to really think very broadly about how we can get the word out, perhaps through community organizations, through libraries, through programs like this. I think word of mouth really has to step up for people to say, hey, I'm going to be voting next week. Are you going to be voting too? Or you remember? I mean, we do that in our family, just informally, because we're so crazed, we never know what day it is. But I don't know if people really do that with their neighbors, and maybe we should do that more often so that more people become aware of people who do vote.
Yes, I think maybe if we get more united, if we have like more meetings to come and teach. I mean, you know, maybe education is one of the keys for that.
How would we do that?
Towards meetings, towards uniting, towards going to reach them where they are, you know, can be church, can be school, can be playgrounds outside.
There's a lot of groups that I think, well, for one thing, I work with labor unions sometimes, and in the progressive parts of the labor movement these days, there's been a lot of effort to have an outreach to people who usually don't vote, who are both labor union members and not labor union members. And in some parts of the country that's been real important, because what it does is it gets people to think about voting not as this static thing where you just choose between two candidates, but in the ways I was trying to say before, which is that because people vote, they draw the attention of candidates who have to respond to the groups that they are in. So in certain places like California, for example, Latinos in California have been have voted much more frequently in the last 4 or 5 years. Part of that's due to labor unions, and part of it's due to Latino groups that have mobilized the vote. But the connection that's always been made by these groups has been that because you are voting, it changes the way politicians have to address you. So the dialogue changes. That is to say, because politicians like in California recognize that there's a lot of Latino voters and a lot of working class voters, they have to start to respond to those issues more than before. And the more groups that attempt to organize the non-voting part of the electorate, the better off we are.
I think that we have this concept of an election day, and I think that's that's the way it's traditionally been, but perhaps we could begin to think about the possibilities of having the election over a period of days. I know that might be a radical idea, but certainly we can try to look at that as how we can make it better or easier for people to vote. I think now with the advent of home computers, we should certainly think about, can people vote using their personal computer, or can people vote by telephone? Now, I don't know if these ideas are workable, but certainly we need to look into that process.
Finance reform is the number one, both at the national and the local level. We need a battle page. We need Gannett to tell us, here, once a week, from now to the election, you can have 150 words, 200 words, not edited, just from you, from your opponent or opponents. At the national level, we need to have free TV time, where you put it on most of the channels, most of the networks all at once, where people, and you don't edit it, you don't have the 30-second analysis. Let the presidential candidates of both parties or whoever's running, come to us unedited, through that. We have the means to educate our people. The networks don't do that because they make millions of dollars. Let's not forget that. Millions of dollars on these campaign ads, and they just as soon have people pay for it and continue with their bits and clips and instant analysis every night on the evening news. They're getting a little better, but I think we need public information. The danger in campaign reform is that the Fifth Estate press would take over. That's a danger that I've heard some Republicans express, and I frankly agree with them. I think that we do need to have a way for our candidates to reach the people unedited with what they think, not being paid for by somebody who's has a wedge on them later, but just free TV. There are airwaves. We own these airwaves. And the people of our country need to have an ability at the local level, it's difficult to do. They say, well, it's going to cost a lot of money. Well, there's an answer. There's certainly that one answer that will increase it. And I think campaign reform, finance reform is the #1 issue in terms of getting rid of some of the cynicism that people allegedly is a reason that they don't vote.
First, I think it would be should be required of all public newspapers to publish something like the
League of Women
Voters do, and perhaps even more completely.
The pros and cons, the opinions of the candidates,
and how they have voted over the period that they've been in office.
More detailed and more concentrated somehow, because you have to get it from page 1A to something on B7 and then C10. It's it should be concentrated in a corner that is called whatever.
The New York Times has a record of the voting, I think every week or every month.
Mm-hmm.
But at election time, unless you've made a study of it, it's not particularly available. I think it should be one easy to read section.
And that
Some of the press, I don't know if they can be required, but I think it'd be a good idea. It's up to particularly the local governmental authorities to publicize their actions more. In Ossining, they do it pretty much with a program on Channel 6, so I'm not sure exactly when that program comes. And that's certainly true of Newcastle. Some things are sloughed over so that even if you pay attention, you're very likely to miss out on why actions are being taken or not taken.
Usual, get an advertising agency to come up with a good slogan, that, of course, I would say, you have no right to complain if you didn't vote last time, but they can put it much more gently, though not too gently.
Care is to explain to people that it is a privilege. Voting is a privilege. It was a hard-fought privilege. We earned this. It wasn't given to us. We had to fight for this privilege to vote. So for us to have a privilege to participate in removing people that do not work for us and to take that privilege and not use it, we are abusing ourselves.
So you're saying we need more education, more outreach to people to make them understand that it's important?
What we actually need is we have to come up with a tool and just be honest about it. You don't vote, you're a fool. You don't vote, you support the other guy. That is the biggest travesty you can do to your own people. It's not to vote for people. If you don't like them, vote against them. If you're dissatisfied, still vote. Vote, always vote. It matters, it counts. It's a privilege that should be exercised by all.